She froze when the letter slipped from her tiny hands and landed in the mailbox with a soft thud. Naomi didn't know where Heaven's address was, but she hoped God could read anything written with tears. "Please," she whispered, her voice trembling in the cold morning air. "Give me a father, one who'll never leave." That same night, thunder rumbled across Houston, and somewhere across town, a wealthy businessman named Elijah Williams woke from a strange dream, a little girl in a blue dress calling him, "Daddy." He sat up, shaken, whispering, "Grace. I think God just spoke to me." Meanwhile, back at Sunnydale Orphanage, Naomi pressed her face to the window, watching lightning split the sky, her heart pounding with an ache she couldn't name. She didn't know it yet, but her letter had already been answered, and her life was about to change forever. And that's where her story truly began. Before we dive deeper, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, comment where you are watching from, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another powerful story. The rain started that afternoon, the kind that whispered against the window pane before turning into a soft roar. Naomi sat by the sill, knees drawn to her chest, watching droplets chase each other down the glass. The air smelled like wet soil and loneliness. At just 7 years old, she had already learned that hope was a fragile thing, something you held close but never too tight, because it might slip away. Sunnydale Orphanage was quiet, except for the creak of old wooden floors and the laughter of other children echoing down the hallway. Naomi didn't join them. She clutched a pencil so small it barely fit between her fingers and pressed a wrinkled piece of paper to her lap. At the top, she had written, "Dear God." Her letters were simple, always the same. "Please send me a mommy and daddy." But this time, her words came slower. Her grandmother, Lillian, the only person who ever hugged her without asking for anything back, had passed away 2 months ago. Naomi hadn't prayed since. But that day, she tried again. She whispered as she wrote, "Dear God, I've been good. I share my food with Daniel even when he eats too fast. I don't fight with the girls who hide my shoes. Please, can you give me a father? Someone strong. Someone who will call me his daughter." Her pencil stopped. The last word smeared when a tear fell on the page. She folded it carefully and slipped it into a white envelope she found under her pillow. On the front, she wrote, "To God, in heaven." No address. No stamp. Just faith. When Mrs. Carter, the social worker, passed her by, she smiled gently. "Writing to God again, sweetheart?" Naomi nodded. "Maybe he forgot my last one." Mrs. Carter's smile faded into something soft and sad. "He doesn't forget, Naomi. Sometimes he's just waiting for the right time." That night, Naomi tiptoed past the sleeping children and walked to the small blue mailbox by the orphanage gate. The moonlight wrapped around her like a spotlight. She reached up on her toes, dropped the letter inside, and whispered, "Please hurry." Across town, in a quiet gated neighborhood, Elijah Williams woke from a dream so vivid it left his chest tight. He sat up, sweat clinging to his neck. Grace, his wife, stirred beside him. "Elijah?" she mumbled, half asleep. He turned toward her, his voice low. "I saw a little girl. She was crying, said she needed a father." Grace blinked, confused. "You mean, like a dream?" He nodded. "But it didn't feel like one." For years, Elijah and Grace had prayed for a child. Doctors told them it was impossible. After a while, Grace stopped crying, but Elijah never stopped praying. His faith was the kind that refused to die, even when logic said otherwise. Grace touched his hand. "Maybe it's time we think about adoption again." Elijah looked out the window. The thunder rolled in the distance, just like the echo of Naomi's prayer. "No," he said softly. "Not just think. Tomorrow we go." Back at Sunnydale, Naomi couldn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling, counting cracks like stars. She wanted to believe God had heard her, but she'd prayed before. She'd waited before. Every adoption day felt like a silent competition, smiling, sitting straight, hoping someone would point and say, "That one." No one ever did. Morning came with golden light spilling through the thin curtains. The smell of oatmeal filled the hall, and the children's chatter bounced off the walls. Naomi sat beside Daniel, a smaller boy with wide eyes and a cough that never seemed to go away. "You think God reads letters?" Daniel asked, mouth full of bread. Naomi hesitated. "I think maybe he does. Just takes him longer to reply." Daniel giggled. "Maybe he's busy." Naomi smiled faintly. "Maybe." But deep inside, her hope trembled. Later that day, Mrs. Carter called out, "Children, we have visitors!" The room exploded in excitement. Shoes scuffed. Faces brightened. Some children ran to fix their hair. Naomi stayed in her seat, her heart drumming softly. Visitors usually meant families, and families meant disappointment. Still, something in her stirred, something small and stubborn. When the door opened, Naomi looked up. A tall man stepped in, his presence filling the room. He had kind eyes and carried himself like someone used to giving orders but too gentle to raise his voice. Beside him stood a woman, elegant, warm, and smiling like sunshine after rain. Mrs. Carter introduced them. "Everyone, this is Mr. and Mrs. Williams." The children crowded around. Questions flew like butterflies. "Do you have a big house? Can we come visit? Do you have a dog?" Naomi stayed back, silent. Elijah's gaze swept across the room, landing on her for just a moment. Something in him stilled. He didn't know why, but he couldn't look away. Grace noticed too. The way his expression softened. Later, while Mrs. Carter showed them around, Grace whispered, "You see her?" Elijah nodded. "The girl from my dream. I swear, Grace, it's her." Grace looked at Naomi, small, quiet, clutching an old photo against her chest. "Then maybe," she said softly, "God's answering us both." But Naomi didn't know that. She only knew that another day had passed, another family had come and gone. That night, she looked out the window again. The rain had stopped, and the stars blinked like tiny promises in the sky. She whispered one last line into the night air. "If you heard me, please don't let me wait too long." The mailbox down the street sat still and silent, but somewhere beyond the clouds, a plan was already unfolding, one Naomi could never have imagined. Because sometimes, when a child writes to heaven, heaven writes back, just not in the way you expect. And as the moon watched over Sunnydale, a pair of strangers lay awake across town, thinking about a little girl they hadn't yet met, and a dream they couldn't forget. Her letter was in God's hands now. The morning sun painted long shadows across the orphanage yard. Naomi stood in line with the others, her small hands tucked into the pockets of her faded yellow dress. She wasn't sure why Mrs. Carter had asked her to stay close that day. Something in her voice, gentle but firm, hinted that it was important. Inside the director's office, Grace and Elijah Williams sat quietly on a sofa, filling out forms. They'd already met some of the children and shared a few smiles. But there was something about this place, the smell of disinfectant and crayons, the sound of laughter hiding quiet pain, that stirred something deep in them. Elijah leaned toward his wife. "Grace, I can't explain it. When I saw that little girl yesterday, it was like I knew her already." Grace smiled softly. "Then maybe we should listen to that feeling." Mrs. Carter overheard as she organized files. "Naomi's a special one," she said. "Strong-willed, quiet, but kind. Life hasn't been easy for her." Grace's eyes softened. "May we see her again?" Mrs. Carter nodded. "Of course." When Naomi entered the room, her steps were careful, like someone walking on glass. She held a drawing, one of her family's, a habit she'd picked up to fill empty hours. "Good morning," Grace greeted, her voice warm. "Is that your drawing?" Naomi nodded shyly and handed it over. The picture showed a tall man, a woman with curly hair, and a little girl between them, smiling, holding their hands. Grace looked at Elijah. The resemblance was uncanny. Elijah leaned forward, smiling. "Did you draw this today?" "Yes, sir," Naomi murmured. "I draw families I wish I had." The room went quiet. Grace's eyes glistened. She reached into her purse for a tissue, and that's when it happened. The purse slipped. Bills, crisp, large denominations, scattered across the floor like fallen leaves. The sound drew the attention of a few older kids outside the open door. Their eyes widened. Before anyone could move, 2 of the boys darted in. "Hey!" Elijah called out, standing, but he was too late. The boys grabbed the money and ran down the hall. Mrs. Carter gasped. "Not again," she muttered, rushing after them. Naomi froze. The room felt heavier now, filled with tension and shock. Grace looked distraught. Elijah sighed, running a hand over his face. Naomi's chest tightened. She remembered her grandmother's words. "The right thing isn't always easy, but it's always right." The hall buzzed with whispers. Naomi could hear the boys arguing near the back staircase. She took a deep breath and walked toward the sound. When she turned the corner, she saw them, Tommy and Reggie, crouched low, splitting the money behind an old cabinet. Tommy looked up first. "Naomi, go away. This ain't your business." Reggie stuffed the cash into his pocket. "Yeah, keep your mouth shut. Nobody'll know." Naomi's throat went dry. For a moment, she hesitated. She could stay quiet. Maybe if she didn't say anything, the Williams family wouldn't leave disappointed again. Maybe they'd still adopt someone, maybe even her. But then she thought of her grandmother again, sitting by the fire, her voice soft but steady. "If you ever want God to trust you with blessings, you must show him he can." Naomi stepped closer. "You have to give it back." Tommy frowned. "Why do you care? They're rich. They won't miss it." Naomi's voice trembled but didn't break. "It's not about the money. It's about what's right." The boys exchanged glances. She could see the conflict flicker in their eyes, but pride won. "Fine," Reggie sneered. "Be a saint, Naomi. Let's see if that gets you adopted." Naomi swallowed hard and ran back to the office. Her heart pounded so fast she could barely breathe. Grace and Elijah looked up as she burst through the doorway. "Ma'am, sir," she panted, "they took your money. But it's behind the old cabinet near the stairs." Mrs. Carter hurried off. Elijah and Grace exchanged a look, one filled with surprise and quiet admiration. When Mrs. Carter returned moments later, holding the recovered money, she smiled through relief. "Naomi, sweetheart, how did you know?" "I saw them," Naomi whispered. "And I just didn't want anyone to get in trouble." Grace rose and knelt before her. "You could have stayed quiet." "Why didn't you?" Naomi hesitated. "Because my grandma used to say honesty makes God smile." For a heartbeat, nobody spoke. Then Grace reached out and pulled Naomi into a gentle hug, the kind Naomi hadn't felt since Lillian's last day. Elijah stood, his voice low. "Grace, this is her." "I know it now." Mrs. Carter blinked in surprise. "You mean?" "Yes," Grace said, her arms still around Naomi. "We prayed for a child. And she prayed for parents. I think God just introduced us." Tears stung Naomi's eyes. "You want me?" Elijah smiled. "If you'll have us, little one." Naomi's lip trembled. She nodded quickly, burying her face in Grace's shoulder. In the doorway, the other children peeked in, curious. Even Tommy and Reggie stood quietly, guilt written across their faces. For the first time, Naomi didn't feel small. She didn't feel invisible. She felt seen, truly seen. As the paperwork began, Grace whispered to Elijah, "You know, maybe God really did read her letter." Elijah chuckled softly. "I think he replied faster than either of us expected." Later, as Naomi packed her small suitcase, filled with drawings, one stuffed rabbit, and her grandmother's locket, Daniel came to her side. "Are you leaving?" he asked, his voice tiny. Naomi smiled through her tears. "Yes, but I'll visit. I promise." Daniel nodded. "Tell God I said thank you?" She laughed softly. "I think he already knows." As Elijah and Grace guided her toward the car, the clouds parted above them, sunlight spilling across the orphanage yard like a quiet blessing. Naomi turned back one last time and waved. For a 7-year-old girl who once wrote letters to heaven, it felt like heaven had finally written back. The day Naomi left Sunnydale Orphanage was warm and golden, the kind of day that made everything feel like a promise. The other children lined up at the gate, waving wildly as the black SUV pulled away. Naomi pressed her hand against the window, her heart caught between joy and disbelief. For so long she had watched other children leave, smiling, crying, hopeful, and every time, she wondered when her turn would come. Now, it finally had. Grace sat beside her in the back seat, her hand resting gently over Naomi's. Elijah drove, glancing at them every few seconds through the mirror. His heart felt full in a way he couldn't describe. For years he'd walked through their big, quiet house, each room echoing with the sound of what was missing. But now, that silence had been broken. By a small giggle, a shy smile, a presence that filled the air with light. Naomi clutched her grandmother's locket as they turned into the Williams driveway. The house was huge, white walls, trimmed hedges, and a fountain that sparkled under the sun. She blinked, unsure if she was still dreaming. "Welcome home," Grace said softly. Naomi's lips parted, but no words came. Home. It was a word she had drawn 100 times, but never truly felt. Grace helped her out of the car. "Come on, sweetheart. There's something we want to show you." Inside, the scent of vanilla candles and fresh lilies filled the air. Framed photos lined the hallway, Grace and Elijah on their wedding day, vacations, family dinners with friends. But at the end of the hallway hung a single empty frame. Elijah smiled when Naomi noticed it. "That one's waiting for our family picture." Naomi's eyes widened. "You mean me too?" Grace knelt down, cupping her cheek. "Especially you." Tears spilled down Naomi's face, silent but pure. Grace wiped them gently. "You don't have to be afraid here, okay? You're safe. You're loved." That night, Naomi couldn't sleep. Not because she was scared, but because her heart was too full. She wandered to the balcony, looking up at the starry Houston sky. "God," she whispered, "thank you. I don't know why you waited so long, but I understand now." Down the hall, Elijah and Grace stood by the doorway, watching her. They didn't interrupt. They just listened, to the sound of a little girl's whispered gratitude. The following weeks were full of firsts. Naomi got her own room, painted soft pink, with shelves for her drawings and a big window facing the sunrise. Grace took her shopping for clothes that actually fit. Elijah taught her how to ride a bike in the backyard, cheering louder than anyone. Still, it took time. Naomi had lived too many days expecting disappointment. Sometimes she flinched when someone raised their voice. Sometimes she'd hide her food, afraid it might be taken away. Grace never scolded her, only hugged her tighter. "You don't ever have to earn our love," she'd whisper. One evening, while setting the dinner table, Naomi found a box wrapped in gold paper. "What's this?" she asked. Elijah smiled. "Something I think you'll like." Naomi opened it carefully. Inside was a frame, and inside that frame, her letter to God. The one she'd written and dropped in the mailbox weeks ago. Her eyes widened. "How did you?" Grace's voice trembled as she explained. "When we finalized your adoption, Mrs. Carter found this tucked behind your bed. She said she thought you'd want to keep it." Naomi held it close to her chest, whispering, "He really did read it." Elijah knelt down beside her. "Yes, he did. And he sent us to find you." That Sunday, they went to church together. Naomi wore a white dress with little pink flowers, her hair braided neatly by Grace. When the pastor asked if anyone had a testimony, Elijah stood. He looked over at Naomi, who sat swinging her legs beside Grace. "For years we prayed for a miracle," he began, voice thick with emotion. "Doctors told us we couldn't have children. But we kept believing that God's no was really a not yet. And then one night I had a dream, a little girl crying for her father. The next day, we met Naomi." The congregation fell silent. Some smiled. Some wiped their eyes. Elijah's voice softened. She didn't just need a family. She reminded us what faith really looks like. When he sat down, Naomi took his hand, whispering, "I think Grandma Lillian told God about you." Elijah smiled through his tears. "Then please thank her for me." From that day on, their home was never quiet again. Laughter filled the rooms where echoes once lived. Naomi's drawings changed too. No more faceless families or lonely houses. Every picture showed the three of them, holding hands, smiling under the same sun. Months passed. Naomi's laughter became the rhythm of the Williams household. She started school, made friends, and even won a small art competition. The judges loved her drawing titled, "Answered Letter." When they asked what it meant, she said simply, "It's about when you talk to God, and He actually answers, but not with thunder or lightning. Sometimes He just sends you people." On her first Christmas with the Williams family, she stood by the fireplace, hanging stockings. One for Mom. One for Dad. And finally, one with her own name, Naomi. Grace placed an arm around her. "What are you thinking about?" Naomi smiled. "Just wondering if God still reads letters, because I want to write Him another one." Elijah chuckled. "And what will you say this time?" Naomi looked up at them, her eyes bright. "I'll just say, thank you for saying yes." As snow began to fall outside, rare and soft for Houston, Naomi felt something settle deep in her heart: peace. She finally understood what her grandmother had meant all along, that goodness always comes back, even if it takes time. And sometimes, when you think you've lost everything, God is just clearing space for something better. Naomi's story wasn't one of luck. It was one of faith, the kind that writes letters when the world says no and still believes someone's listening. And that's how a 7-year-old girl who once prayed for a father found a family she didn't just dream about, but deserved all along. Moral of the story: every prayer has its season, and every heart that stays kind will find its answer, even if it takes time. Naomi's story reminds us that honesty, patience, and faith never go unseen. When you least expect it, the love you've been searching for might be searching for you, too. So keep believing, keep doing good, and never stop writing your letters, because heaven always listens. If this story touched you, like this video, subscribe to King's Folklore, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters.